Hi, Dr. Christie here with our Sunday School lesson for the week entitled, God's People Shall Prosper. And we continue in the Old Testament book of Isaiah, chapter 49, verses 18 through 23. The features of our lesson today includes 2 goals and an outline that is divided into 2 sections. The key verse is found in chapter 49, verse 23. There are a few facts about the book of Isaiah and Isaiah the prophet. The scriptures include verses 18 through 23, and then we have our conclusion. Our lesson goals include 2 points. 1, you should be able to list 1 or more ways by which the people will be able to know that God is the Lord from this prophecy. And then 2, you should be able to tell how the meanings of 1 or more of these lines of text in this lesson are clarified by a parallel thought that follows it. Section 1 outline is entitled Promise of Restoration, and it covers Isaiah chapter 49, verses 18 through 21. Verses 18 through 20, we may call it the ornamentation that is spoken of in these verses. And then verse 21 indicates some disorientation for the people. Section 2 of our outline can be entitled The Explanation of Restoration, and it covers verses 22 and 23. Verse 22 through 23a, the foreigners are called. And then verse 23b, the people are encouraged to be hopeful and not ashamed. Verse 23 is your key verse of this lesson text, and it reads, Kings will be your foster fathers, and their queens your nursing mothers. They will bow down before you with their faces to the ground. They will lick the dust at your feet. Then you will know that I am the Lord. Those who hope in me will not be disappointed. And this is the prophecy that we're reading of in our lesson text for this week. Here are a few interesting facts about the prophet Isaiah and the book of Isaiah. Prophet Isaiah was a prophet in the 8th century before Christ in the kingdom of Judah. His name means God is salvation, and he was an evangelical prophet. According to Jewish tradition, Prophet Isaiah was born into the aristocratic royal family of Jerusalem. His father, according to Jewish tradition, was the brother to King Uzziah. And Prophet Isaiah ministered in Jerusalem during the reign of these 4 kings, King Uzziah, King Jotham, King Ahaz, and then King Hezekiah. Prophecy and tradition also says that Isaiah was sawed in half according to the Hebrew tradition. And he was a contemporary prophet along with Prophet Micah, Prophet Amos, and Prophet Hosea. Here is a biblical time frame of when Prophet Isaiah existed in his ministry. During the biblical time, it was when the kingdom was divided, the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes, and it expanded over a biblical period of 200 years. And the books that were part of the 200 years giving us biblical history included 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, Isaiah, Amos, Jonah, Hosea, and Micah. And the important prophets also at that time were Elijah, Elisha, and Isaiah. This time also includes the event with the rebellion of the 10 tribes and the emerging empire that was going to be taken control was Assyria. For Isaiah's ministry, the book of Isaiah belongs to the latter days of the divided kingdom. Isaiah was a preacher and prophet to the smaller kingdom of Judah and those 2 tribes. Its capital city was Jerusalem, sometimes referred to as Zion. Isaiah helped to prevent Judah's captivity and exile by Assyria when the Assyrian king Sennacherib invaded the land during King Hezekiah's reign. That's recorded in 2 Kings chapter 17 through 20, 2 Chronicles chapter 26 to 32, and Isaiah chapters 36 through 39. However, Isaiah's ministry began 47 years earlier in the last year of King Uzziah, which was Hezekiah's great-grandfather, recorded in Isaiah chapter 6. So Isaiah's ministry spanned the reigns of 4 kings in Judah, and that's indicated in chapter 1 of Isaiah. The lesson scriptures, verse 18. Lift up your eyes and look around. All your children gather and come to you. The call to lift up your eyes is a new posture, one of hope rather than of desperation. 18b. As surely as I live, declares the Lord, you will wear them as ornaments. You will put them on like a bride. The image here is one of extreme reversal. In contrast to the mourning clothes Zion had been wearing because of their predicament, the Lord promised that she would have reason to dress like a bride. And the appropriate attire for a bridal city is a thriving human population. Those who returned would be Zion's ornamentation, the source and sign of Zion's newfound joy. 19a. Though you were ruined and made desolate and your land laid waste, now you will be too small for your people. Rather than emphasize the current scarcity of the land of Zion, the prophecy shared here instead focuses on its future when it will be full of life. It will be revitalized, and Zion will experience all the joys and thriving of human life within its borders. 19b. And those who devoured you will be far away. And in this prophecy, the city and the returned exiles were assured that those who destroyed and devoured them, the Babylonians, will be far away and thus unable to cause them any further pain or terror. And even more important than the actual geographical distance was to be the absolute loss of the power that Babylon had exercised over them. And from that, they would no longer experience the sorrow when they returned to Judah. Verse 20. The children born during your bereavement will yet say in your hearing, this place is too small for us. Give us more space to live in. The growth of the Jewish population during the captivity was very significant. It is reminiscent of the growth that the Hebrew people experienced when they were caught in bondage and held in Egypt for over 430 years. And of course, that's recorded in Exodus chapter 12. They went into Egypt as a family of 70 people, recorded in Genesis chapter 46. And as the family of Jacob and his sons grew, they left Egypt as a nation of about 600,000 men, as counted in Exodus chapter 12, and more than 2 million people in total. Important for you to know is that the ones who would return to Zion are portrayed as her children in this verse. In the short-term understanding, these are primarily a new generation that was born in the exile. Though some elders might return and had returned, many other returning exiles had never seen Jerusalem when it was in its heyday, when the temple was standing, and that's recorded in Ezra chapter 3. So like it was in Egypt, the population of the people expanded so much that the land was too small to contain them all. Again, that's recorded in the book of Exodus. But unlike it was the situation back then, the people would not be oppressed because of their flourishings. What was even more important in the long term, the Gentiles would be welcomed into God's family. Yes, that's what this was all about, ushering in a new understanding that all people would be God's children, regardless of their religious or their ethnic background, and even their geographical relationship to Jerusalem. The place where Zion's children could live would turn out to be throughout this world, to even the most remote locations, as the Word of God, the gospel, was spread according to Jesus' teachings. Verse 21, "Then you will say in your heart, 'Who bore me these? I was bereaved and barren. I was exiled and rejected. Who brought these up? I was left all alone, but these, where have they come from?'" So here the change of fortune that was promised to Zion is so extreme that Zion will experience extreme disorientation when they heard the news. Zion's reaction is not described as disbelieving, but more so incredulous or being bewildered. Actually, the people being afraid to hope that this return would be true. So Zion would have lost her children and become bereaved and barren, exiled and rejected. She would not be aware that any of her children had survived. Her experience would soon be that of Babylon, who had brought all this evil on Zion. Babylon would experience widowhood and the loss of her children in that day. And that's recorded earlier in Isaiah chapter 47. Verse 22a, "This is what the sovereign Lord says. See, I will beckon to the nations. I will lift up my banner to the peoples." In this verse, Zion is once again called to see, as it was shared in verse 18. God's beckoning to the nations and lifting up his banner to the peoples reveal that God will use foreign nations to accomplish his will for Zion. It also could be that God was warning any people, as the prophecy shares in this book of Isaiah, to those nations that God warned that they could not and should not stand against his people of Israel. Verse 22b, "They will bring your sons in their arms and carry your daughters on their hips." Here we read that the Gentiles will provide the help for these sons and daughters who were making their return trip back to Judah. And that's recorded in the book of Ezra as well as in the book of Nehemiah. This image is of parental care, unexpected from these foreign nations, but in keeping with what God required of them. As you know and you read, you also see that they were used to provide not only food and clothing and animals for their worship and for travel, but as well gold for returning to get themselves back up for what Israel had looked like in their heyday. So the exiles would not be kicked out of their exilic homes and left defenseless, or left without anything to help them, assist them, or to fend for themselves. Verse 23a. Kings will be your foster fathers, and their queens your nursing mothers. They will bow down before you with their faces to the ground. They will lick the dust at your feet. This prophecy that Isaiah is continuing to share here in our study of this week, the image here is one of both care and humility. Being provided for by kings and queens are foster parents, and reveals how important the people are to God, that the most powerful royals are to be called to nurture these people back. It also suggests that the abundance of worldly resources that God will manage for the sake of his people. The image might remind us of how the daughter of Pharaoh cared for Moses back in Exodus chapter 2. In this prophecy, the language of the Gentiles that were going to be in submission to God's will points to the future when people from all nations would acknowledge that God of Israel is the only God. And 23b. Then you will know that I am the Lord. Those who hope in me will not be disappointed. The phrase, you will know that I am the Lord, is used frequently in the book of Ezekiel. And knowing starts with accepting the facts, but requires much more. Then, as well as it is now, knowing the Lord requires obeying him. First of all, by rejecting any and all others who claim the same status. And that's shared in the book of Exodus, as well as earlier in one of the chapters of Isaiah, chapter 42, in fact. So following closely after this is living in accordance with God's revealed laws, not choosing for ourselves what seems good or simply justifiable. Again, that's shared in the book of Psalms. And although knowing the Lord requires faith, God also supplies plenty of evidence to give us confidence in who God is. In conclusion, chapter 49 of our text is included in several chapters that speak of the return and restoration after the exile from Babylon. And here, Prophet Isaiah repeatedly claims the premise, there is no God besides me. And that starts in chapter 44, 45, and continues. There is also another foretelling of the Jesus, the Messiah, who will come and bring new life through his crucifixion, death, and resurrection. So as a final reminder, we trust that you have learned that Isaiah 49 is the prophecy that is giving the people of Zion a bit of hope and a bit of comfort from leaving the area of Babylon in exile back to Judah, so that they can start afresh, start anew, and be comforted that the Lord God, who they served, still is in control, still is in provision for them, providing for them, and in control of protecting them through the journey. It also leads into the future. You like us? We hope that you will give us a thumbs up, share this video with your friends, leave a comment, and consider subscribing as you continue your day, receiving God's peace and fulfill promises for you in your life.